Why is Donald Trump cracking down on international students? His administration said it will revoke the visas of Chinese students. US embassies have also been instructed to pause new interviews. So how much of this is politics, and what fallout could US universities suffer? This is Inside Story. Hello there, I'm James Bays. It's the latest move by the Trump administration in a campaign against US universities and international students, a decision to revoke the visas of Chinese students, which number in the hundreds of thousands in the US. The Secretary of State has also announced the suspension of interviews for new student visa applicants and an increase in the vetting of their social media. With China being the second biggest source of international students in the US after India, the reduction in revenues is expected to be heavy. President Donald Trump has already cut funding to Harvard. The Ivy League university says it's part of an attempt to dictate its curriculum and a retaliation after it challenged the administration in court. The White House says it's part of a battle against what it claims is anti-Semitism, and the administration is acting in the name of national security. With some of the best students from around the world traditionally choosing to study in the US every year, how is academia and research likely to be affected in the country and around the world? And what might be the impact on relations between Washington and Beijing? We'll get to our panel of guests in just a moment, but first this report from Imogen Kimber.
Students loudly reject the Trump administration's targeting of international students and US universities. The latest move in the campaign, a declaration by Secretary of State Marco Rubio that the United States will aggressively revoke visas for Chinese students, including those with connections to the Chinese Communist Party, saying, "America first, not China." More than 270,000 Chinese students were in the US last year, taking up a quarter of all places in its schools and universities, and contributing billions of dollars to the economy. The Chinese Foreign Ministry spoke out against the decision.
China has consistently held the position that educational cooperation and academic exchange should not be disrupted. We urge the US side to safeguard the rights and interests of international students, including those from China.
The announcement came a day after the Trump administration said it would be suspending the processing of all student visas at US embassies worldwide to enable increased vetting of social media, throwing the lives of thousands into turmoil. The largest amount of foreign students in the US come from India, and this one says it will be America that suffers.
US has always been brain training all over the world. Trump is working with the government. I feel like America's decline is gonna happen very soon.
A week before this decision, the Trump administration attempted to stop Harvard University from enrolling international students, who make up a third of its intake. But that was temporarily blocked by a federal judge. This comes on the back of the president cutting Harvard's federal funding, totaling more than $2 billion, in what the faculty said was an attempt to control its academic independence. The White House claimed it was to combat what it called anti-Semitism on campuses, referring to students protesting against the genocide in Gaza.
We want to know where those students come. Are they troublemakers? What countries do they come? And we're not going to, if somebody is coming from a certain country and they're 100% fine, which I hope most of them are, but many of them won't be, you're going to see some very radical people. They're taking people from areas of the world that are very radicalized.
Back in March, you noted that you had revoked some 300 student visas.
Hundreds of international university students have already lost their visas.
I don't know the latest count, but we probably have more to do.
Many of them had taken part in protests against Israel's war on Gaza. International students bring in billions of dollars for the US every year, in fees and in their spending, says the National Foundation for American Policy. And they bring their potential, which makes the US a global centre for research and development, according to the Association of Universities. Critics say this is exactly what could be lost without them. Imogen Kimber, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Well, let's discuss all of this further with our panel of guests today. And in San Diego, we have Clay Harmon. He's Executive Director of the Association of International Enrollment Management. In Tucson, Arizona, Alexandra Miller is an immigration lawyer and senior advisor to Vecina, a non-profit group that advocates for immigrant justice. And in Shanghai, Josef Gregory Mahoney is Professor of Politics and International Relations at the East China Normal University. Thank you, all three of you, for joining us today on Inside Story. So this is an administration, I think, that has surprised people with the amount of issues it's trying to confront at once, from tariffs to international peace efforts regarding the Iran nuclear program and Ukraine and Russia, amongst other things. But we now find that US higher education and foreign students in particular is at the very top of the list. Alexandra, what do you think this administration is trying to achieve?
Well, I think we have to zoom out and look at a much bigger picture. This administration has not just been attacking higher education institutions, but attacking law firms and immigration attorneys and others. And it's part and parcel of efforts to control the narrative, to undermine people who oppose the activities of the administration, and to leverage immigrants as a tool to fearmonger amongst American citizens instead of focusing on the real problems we have here. And we know that this is not actually going to make the United States stronger. In fact, it'll make us weaker.
Clay, why do you think international students are in the administration's crosshairs? Because on the whole, international students pay higher fees. They subsidize US students, and it means the US gets the brightest and best from around the world. It's gone on for decades. Other countries have complained. There's a brain drain to the US. So why do you think that they're pursuing this policy?
Indeed, that's an excellent question, and we struggle to make sense of these headlines and these moves that we hear. The 1 million plus international students inside the US support over 378,000 jobs due to the fees, as they mentioned, that you pay higher education as well as all the other spending that they do. That's one job created or supported for every 3 international students. They are in small towns and big cities in all 50 states around the country. They are here in high schools, in trade schools, all the way up through those research universities. There may or may not be some social or some national security concerns with a small number of those students, but there are already programs in place to mitigate that before those students earn their visas to enter. So there does not seem to be any real rational basis from a policy standpoint for these attacks.
And Clay, I know you're there joining us from San Diego. I hear you're there because you're attending a conference of the Association of International Educators. Tell us the feeling there among delegates that you're speaking to.
Indeed, I'm here in San Diego at NAFSA, the Association of International Educators, which is the largest international education conference in the world. And we have over 8,000 folks in the sector here this week from all over the US and from all over the world. We are reacting in real time to the news that's coming in this week. I think we're very grateful to be in community with each other this week. There is, of course, a lot of exhaustion at this point after 4 months of these constant attacks. There is, of course, confusion. One message that I heard loud and clear in a very helpful panel discussion yesterday was that even though the news is urgent, that we do need to practice patience. We do need to do our homework. We do need to learn exactly what do these new pronouncements mean in terms of what the government is actually doing behind the scenes, what is actually coming down the pike, so that we can adequately and correctly advise students as to what they need to do. How does this actually affect them? We do not have any details about any of these 2 most recent announcements this week. And the first thing that we need to do is try to ascertain as many of those operational details as we can.
You're right. We don't have many details about these latest announcements and pronouncements that have come from the White House and the State Department, but I'd like to go through them and see what you make of each of them. And Joseph, I want to go to you on the latest one, which is on Chinese students. This is an announcement from the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio on Wednesday evening US time that the Trump administration will work to, and I quote, aggressively revoke the visas of Chinese students, including those with ties to the Chinese Communist Party or who are studying in critical fields. Now, those are the two criteria. We don't know what those critical fields are, and we don't know how close the ties have to be to the Chinese Communist Party. What are people making of it there in Shanghai?
Well, English is my first language, and I agree with my colleagues there. There's not much information to go on there, but frankly, the grammar of that sentence is already a bit confusing. I think the broad assumption that many people have taken is that they will be targeting all Chinese students, but then, is it qualified by simply those who are members of the Communist Party or those who are in sensitive fields? What are sensitive fields? Or as you asked, how close does one have to be to the party? The bottom line is, I think there's a lot of hand-wringing and disappointment here. We have a lot of people who have spent 4 years, ever since middle school, in some cases, preparing to go to the United States to study. That's been their target. The way the high schools work here, you either take a track that would prepare you for the Gaokao, for the Chinese exam and a Chinese university, or you prepare to go overseas. And traditionally, most Chinese students, if they're going overseas, had planned to go to the U.S. They would be planning to take the SAT, as well as saving up their dollars so they would be able to pay those exorbitant fees in the United States. So I think there's a lot of people. I know a number of my colleagues who had children who are planning to go or hoping to go next year. And of course, all of these plans are now wrecked. And there's not, although there are other universities around the world that are saying, hey, we'd love to have you. It's not quite clear yet how people will quickly adjust and move forward.
And Joseph, it is fair, isn't it, that in the past, these students, these Chinese students who come to the US, have included family members of very senior members of the Chinese Communist Party, including President Xi. His own daughter, under a pseudonym, went to Harvard, graduated back in 2014.
Well, I think that it's certainly the case that a lot of people are members of the party in China, and certainly in so much as the party is the ruling party in this country. Being a party member doesn't convey the sort of terrible image that I think people in the U.S. Sometimes associate. Certainly, people like Marco Rubio and other anti-communist ideologues. This is not a monolithic party state. This is not one man controlling the thoughts and actions of everyone. And I think in the case of a lot of party members, they are simply high-level, high-performing people who were invited to join the party. They're not very political or not political at all. They're just simply moving forward in a way to realize their best potential, and to target them or to politicize them in this sort of way is gratuitous.
And Alexandra, of course, the backdrop to this is already the other big thing, or one of the other big things that's been going on in the last 4 months, the tariff war with China, although that's had its own legal setback recently. What would you say about the context of this with regard to US-China relations?
Yeah, I mean, looking at the broader context, we're talking about scapegoating. Scapegoating across national lines, across racial lines, et cetera, and targeting China is part and parcel to a strategy to distract, again, from what we need to do here in the United States to make our country stronger and better. And along with this is a generalized attack on immigrants and aligning our perspective on immigration as a sort of zero-sum game where immigrants and those coming to our country to work, to make us stronger, or to seek protection are actually a threat, which we know is not the case. When we're talking about students, Chinese students, all of the folks at the 25% of people at Harvard who were international students, we're talking about people's neighbors, people's friends. I look back at my own time in university and think about the strong bonds I made with international students and how that changed my perspective on the world. And maybe that's part of what the Trump administration is so afraid of, is that when we are able to be in community with each other, we learn different perspectives on the world. And I think that makes us stronger.
So there are, I believe, about 275,000 Chinese students, Clay. But of course, there's this other bit of news that we've had in recent days, that they are halting all interviews for student visas globally. Every single embassy and consulate around the world, unless you've already got your interview booked, then they are not going to arrange any new interviews. And this apparently, maybe you can explain this to me, applies to F visas, M visas, and J visas. I mean, how devastating is this going to be?
This is a very significant move that will have, obviously, the immediate effect on those folks who were trying to get interviews, as well as a longer-term chilling or ripple effect that may dissuade people from trying to come to the United States, even if and when those visa interviews do get restarted. Now, it's interesting that the stated rationale, again, very few details, but the stated rationale is a pause in new visa interviews in order to implement some sort of new system, which will include a more intensive vetting of social media. We have already had social media vetting in place for student visa interviews since 2017. This is not a new thing. And the other thing that our sector does not understand is why is a pause required, especially at a global scale. The State Department frequently tweaks their procedures, and in fact, every independent embassy and consulate around the world has slightly different procedures, which they often implement without stopping the flow. So we don't understand why the freeze on interviews, other than for some reason a desire to have this kind of chilling effect.
Alexandra, what do we think they're looking for in people's social media?
Ultimately, I think that this is an attack on First Amendment rights, right? People's associations, their beliefs, and whether those align with the current administration's goals, political goals.
Okay, let me just stop you there. Let me stop you there. The First Amendment of the Constitution, but these people aren't in the United States. They're trying to get to the United States. So legally, you're the lawyer here. Does the Constitution, does that legal protection apply to them?
Sure. The Constitution does not apply to people who are not in the United States, but it certainly does apply to the students that are here already. And where we've seen arrests and folks taken into detention has been largely aligned with their political and free speech activity. I also think when you look more broadly at the institutions that are being attacked, whether we're talking about Harvard, whether we're talking about law firms, we're talking about actions that are taken intentionally to have a chilling effect and to try to move those institutions in line with the administration. And that's a constitutional issue.
So, Josef, China is a country where those in charge are often criticised for censorship and for restrictions on social media. What are they saying about what the Trump administration is doing here?
Well, I think that the Chinese position has long been, you're entitled to set your rules as you see fit. That's your internal domestic affairs, and China doesn't intend to meddle in any other country's internal domestic affairs. But, once you place those rules on the books, once you invite people, once you have entered into various agreements with individual students, individual Chinese citizens, or with exchange programs with Chinese universities or Chinese government agencies, then you have an obligation to carry those forward and not to create some silly excuse for derailing all of these other commitments that have been made and that people have put a lot of time and money on trying to move forward.
play. The other aspect of all of this, and this has been going on for some weeks now, is a specific attack on probably the most famous university in the US and the richest and most wealthy educational institute in the world, I think, 388 years old, Harvard University. How do you explain the fact that this one university, that some might say is the jewel in the US education crown, is facing such an onslaught?
Well, Harvard is obviously a very powerful global brand, and that must be connected to why it is a target of the administration. That to demonstrate that they can try to take down even the most powerful and any center of dissent, as Alexandra was saying, can be a target regardless of its strengths or resources. I think that many international students and their parents, as well as folks in the sector around the world, see a different sort of dimension to that, which is if the Trump administration is able to target Harvard, which is so powerful and so wealthy and so well known around the world, then how could any other U.S. institution stand a chance against them? And while Harvard is very prominent, and Harvard and Columbia and other of those prominent institutions do get a lot of attention and suck up a lot of the oxygen in the media, the reality is that the vast majority of students, international and otherwise, attend public institutions all around the country, attend a wide variety of institutions, international students from high schools, trade schools, all the way up to research universities. And if Harvard itself can be attacked, then how do you feel safe going to other schools? So what we're more concerned about actually in the field is the potential impact that this may have on other institutions across the country.
Josef, I know you're there in Shanghai, but you are an American. Harvard, with its $53.2 billion endowment, that is $10 billion more than any of the other universities. The second one is Yale. Can you really have sympathy for Harvard when it has that amount of money? Does Trump not have a little bit of a point there?
Well, I think we can say is one doesn't have to concede that Trump has a point, while also realizing that Harvard has left itself vulnerable to criticisms of elitism, certainly for being out of step with some of Trump's populist base, certainly for having sucked up so much of the extramural funding through the years, which I don't think a lot of people understand how all of those billions of dollars ended up at Harvard, how they would poach scholars from other institutions once those scholars got large grants from the government or the government source or other funding sources, and then they would, offer positions, and then the money would carry with them when they moved to Harvard. So, there is, I think, some resentment directed at Harvard among American universities themselves, and certainly among people who wish they could have access to that sort of institution, but nevertheless see that that their tax dollars are doing so much to fund it. Nevertheless, I think everyone realizes that the attack on Harvard is an attack on everyone, and certainly I would hope that people would understand that this mislabeling the protest against the genocide and apartheid being practiced in Gaza as anti-Semitism, and this in tandem with people like Larry Summers, the former president of Harvard, who is against Trump's policies, but has nevertheless conceded that Trump is correct, that anti-Semitism is a problem at Harvard. This is all nonsense, and I think that we need to realize that the attacks on Harvard, and certainly the allegations of anti-Semitism, are all bogus, and we need to focus on that as we encourage broader resistance to
Alexandra, moving beyond Harvard and looking at this in the whole, I mean, how will this affect the US? Because a lot of these people coming to these universities end up doing research work, which leads to innovation, scientific research, work in the IT field, work now in the AI field. How is this going to affect the US going forward?
Again, as I've said, and as my colleagues have said, immigrants in general are a massive economic boon for the United States. The ability for international people to come here, whether they're coming through student visas, whether they're coming for work, whether they're coming to seek protection and then end up working and contributing to the community, is generally a positive thing for the United States. And this attack on Harvard, akin to the attacks on immigration attorneys and the fundamental undermining of the institutions that are here to protect immigrants, we're out here also being defunded, stripped of access to our clients, especially the most marginalized amongst immigrants. And all of those things are very intentional. They're meant to have a chilling effect. They're meant to undermine and start chipping away at the civil liberties that we all rely on as Americans. And it's a scary thing to behold.
Clay, what about other countries? We hear now that other countries are seeking to benefit. Let me read you this quote from the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. This is a once-in-a-century brain gain opportunity.
Yes, indeed. The United States exists in a competitive marketplace for international education. And if you were at the NAFSA conference this week and roamed the expo hall, you would see that there are many nations who've invested significant amounts of money in very impressive booths and have invited many of their top institutions here to San Diego to interface with international educators from all over the world and to attract top talent. So there are many countries that have for many years been taking this very seriously as a national objective to attract talent from all over the world to their institutions, who are investing significantly, who have strategies in place to compete. And the US's market share globally for international students has been in decline for a generation. Because the U.S. has not had a similar concerted effort and has not recognized its vulnerability long-term to compete with these other countries, who are certainly very vital and happy to have conversations here in San Diego about why Japan or Czechia or Turkey is the right destination for international students.
Thanks very much, and thanks to all of our guests today, Alexandra Miller, Clay Harmon, and Josef Gregory Mahoney. For more context and analysis, please go to our website, aljazeera.com. As ever, we'd like to hear from you. What did you think about this issue? What should we discuss next time? Post your ideas on our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. Or find us on X, where we're at AJ Inside Story. From me, James Bays, and all the team here, please stay safe and well. Bye-bye for now.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.